Okay, it being 3 o'clock, I'm going to call this hearing to order. That clock, I think, is a little slow, but we're all here and ready to go. So, I call this meeting of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board to order. My name is Sean Krauser. I'll be the chair for this hearing. All questions and comments shall be directed through the chair. The board members will now introduce themselves, starting on my far left.
I'm Greg Birch.
Jill Jameson.
Adam Dreidzik.
Thank you. And the clerk for this hearing is Jolene Noel. And are there any additions, changes to the agenda? It's just the one item. Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Now, before introducing the appeal by the development officer, I'd ask each member of town administration to present to introduce themselves. So if we could just start with yourself.
Jane Dean, permit clerk.
Great, thank you. And now I would ask the development officer to provide us with the appeal file number that we're hearing today.
So the file number for this appeal, it's for a new B&B establishment, rental of one guest room, and the number is DP 2019-017.
Great, thank you. Now I'd ask the appellant to identify yourself.
Neil
Woodruff. And are you Ms. Schneider?
Paige Schneider.
Paige Schneider, very good, and so welcome as well. So everybody's been introduced. I'd need to ask the appellant, do you have any objection to any of the board members here being present? Okay, hearing this appeal. Okay, and have you received a copy of the agenda package distributed to the board, and do you have any objections to the information provided?
No objections.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go over the hearing outline here as to what you can expect. First, administration will make a presentation. Then the appellant will speak in favor of the appeal, followed by any others, if any others show up that would speak in favor of the appeal, and we would receive any correspondence with respect to being in favor of the appeal. Then those speaking in opposition of the appeal or any correspondence is heard. And lastly, if there's anyone that shows up that would like to speak that's neither in favor nor opposition, then they would have a chance to speak at that time. At any time, the board may ask for clarification by any of the persons speaking to the appeal. And administration will be asked when it's time to close if they wish to provide any clarification or closing remarks, followed by any clarification or closing remarks from the appellant and Ms. Schneider. The board would then close the public portion of the hearing and go in camera, and will review all the information provided. The board will then provide a written decision within 15 days following this hearing, although we try to do much quicker than that. Now, the purpose of this hearing is for the appellant and all affected parties to provide the board with information to the appeal. The board must base its decision on planning merits. As outlined a moment ago, all affected persons will be given an opportunity to speak. Please ensure that all comments are directed to the board. Also, we would ask that all comments be of proper decorum and be succinct. And if any person presenting is referring to a written document, then a copy of those documents are to be left with the clerk. Do either of you have any concerns with what I've just described as the process? No? Great, thank you. All right then, let's begin hearing from the various parties. I'd now like to ask the development officer to make your presentation with regards to the appeal.
Thank you. So we've introduced this as an appeal of a new B&B establishment. It's for one rental, or a rental of one guest room at 337 Eagle Heights in Canmore. And so we have a number of statutory requirements of development officers, all of which by the opinion of staff, have been met. These dates that you see up here are when these various pieces were complete, and it all follows our guidelines and bylaw.
Thank you.
And so the site context, the home that we're looking at is right in the middle of the image on the screen. It's 337. What I'd like to note is that the site's on Eagle Terrace. All the adjacent properties are residential. There's approximately 4 other B&Bs within about 500-meter radius of this location, but none of them show up on this map. And there are no other B&Bs on this street. So the proposed development is this home right in the center of this image. The only outward evidence of business going in, it will be a small sign that will be placed adjacent to the garage door for any guests, if this is approved, to know that this is the home that they need to arrive at. And so the number of sections from the land use bylaw, there's 5 sections that sort of relate to what we are discussing here today. First being section 9302. All bed and breakfast applications require a development permit, and that development permit can be revoked at any time. 93011D, bed and breakfasts shall provide on-site parking stalls as required by section 8 in the general regs of the bylaw. And then right below that, because the applicant's going after 1 guest room, that's requiring 1 parking stall. Those stalls shall not be in tandem with the homeowner. So the homeowner will have 2 stalls, the guests would have 1. Section 9303, bed and breakfast accommodations shall not interfere with the rights of residents to a quiet enjoyment of a residential neighborhood. As mentioned above, this is for 1 bedroom. All of the activities take place within the home in terms of what is being rented. Parking will take place on private property within the driveway of the applicant. And so the assumption is that there won't be any interference. And then lastly, section 9309, this stipulates separation distances between this applicant and other bed and breakfasts, but as outlined in the previous slide, there aren't any that we need to concern ourselves with. And so in summary, briefly, this application accommodates 1 stall necessary for the granting of the permit, and then all other standard and specific conditions are also to be met by the applicant. Those are noted in Schedule A, which is also in your file. And there are no variances requested. And so I approved this application because it's my understanding that it's in accordance of the R1A district and the land use bylaw with the town.
Thank you, Mr. Welsh. I'd look to my colleagues. Any questions of administration? Mr. Birch?
Sorry, thanks. There's one other item in that list that was missed. It's 9308 of the land use bylaw. It says bed and breakfast accommodation shall be limited to a maximum of 5% of the total number of occupied single-family residences within the applicable town of Canmore census district as identified in the most recent municipal census. I'm assuming that we're not at 5%, but can you verify that?
I cannot off the top of my head. I'm not sure if any of my colleagues can within the room. I know that the separation distance is intended to get at that percentage.
Could we just ask that while other presentations are being made, you'll be able to look up the answer to that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. In the separation distance, I'm not quite clear how that relates to the 500-meter. So in the bylaw, it says not less than 4 lots separating the proposed B&B from any other B&B on the same side of the street. So that's condition satisfied. Is that correct? Because there's no other B&Bs on the street?
Yes, that was simply for context of density of
right. So
B&Bs
there's no
in
other
the area.
B&Bs on that street.
Correct, there aren't any.
And then B says the nearest existing B&B operation across the street or lane from the proposed B&B is not less than 3 lots from the proposed B&B. So does this particular B&B meet that criteria?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So the 500, there are a number of B&Bs within 500 meters of this?
There are 4 within 500 meters of this home, but the two stipulations for separation distance have been met by this
Okay.
applicant.
Because our map doesn't show where those B&Bs are, right?
Right, as I
Which
had
is-
mentioned, they're outside of the bound, outside of what the map shows,
Okay,
constraint-wise. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
There's just one other thing I would just point out, and it's obviously just a typo in the notice of decision. It does say that there's 2 rooms that's being applied for in the preamble, and then in the conditions, it clarifies there's only 1 room, so.
Yes, 2 rooms were applied for, but only 1 was granted due to the parking restraint.
Okay, so that's just referring to what was requested.
Yes.
Okay,
So if you refer back to the original application by the applicant,
all right.
I believe 2 were stated on there.
Might have
So
been-
we only
might have been 3, I thought.
we only approved 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
All right, very good. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for your presentation.
Sure.
I'd now call upon the appellant, Mr. Woodruff.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I have put in beforehand a list of a number of the items that we thought were applicable in this area to this property. But before I start my presentation, I'd like to make a quote from a paragraph from Kim Manning of Canmore in her letter to the editor of the Rocky Mountain Outlook on May the 9th of this year. People pay the premium that it costs to buy in an R1 zone for the quiet, privacy, and stability that it affords them. From what I hear from other R1 residents, this is a common factor in deciding where to buy. The changes in the LUB essentially change the zoning from a single family and duplex to a multifamily. We found this very applicable to our situation. This is just not an appeal by myself, but from 5 surrounding families that are very concerned in the neighborhood. A 6th family has also stated a few weeks ago that they also are very concerned about a B&B on our street. Unfortunately, or fortunately, these 5 families are working today or had other appointments or had commitments to family far away. This application is the first time any of us have heard that a B&B commercial variance could be on our street. I had asked the planning department when this variance was passed for the R1 zoning changes, but have not heard back. It was never mentioned during the purchase of our property. We do not buy on Eagle Heights to be next to a B&B. We understand the need for short-term stay accommodations in the Bow Valley. We believe it makes sense to create short-term accommodations close to retail properties such as restaurant, foods, shopping stores, equipment rental stores, etc. But we do not agree that commercial properties be located in an R1 single-family area, unless they are identified during the planning stages of development and clearly identified to the new purchasers. Our understanding has been that the planning department has always been concerned about the social aspects during the design phase of new subdivisions, during development permits, changes, and all the while maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood family concept. We have read the planning department's report and see that the physical aspect of the house had nothing wrong with it, and that the parking on the site was adequate for 1 rental room, rather than the requested 3 rooms. We were wondering who is going to monitor that 1 room in use. We're not sure also of who's going to monitor the parking on the short-term stay renters. Will that fall on us, the neighbors? We think it will be a little difficult for the B&B owner to continually monitor the parking. I'd like to add, I noticed that the planner, Josh, mentioned about properties number of people in the area. Does the planning department consider that across the street are all R1Ss, which allow suites in them? Is that built into the calculations when you're doing a B&B? This area was designed accordingly to have long-term renters. Anyway, I just questioned that because I'd never heard that one before. We also noticed that nothing was mentioned about the social impact of a commercial B&B on the neighbors, neighborhood, and the culture of the street. As mentioned, many of us are concerned about the safety, the children's safety, and petty theft. The planning department's report did not address anything related to the fruit and berry trees on the property. The street has had problems with bears, especially in the fall. For the last few years, the bears have been wandering on our street to 337 Eagle Heights, and on one occasion we had to phone the authorities to come as the bears were sleeping in the driveway. When the authorities came, the officer found evidence that bears had been sleeping in the backyard. The rest of the B&Bs mentioned in the response to our concerns are not on our street in Eagle Terrace. We believe these properties were identified early in the development stages and built to stringent specifications. None were identified on our street, and therefore we all bought. The B&B permit allows the owner to rent to anyone on a short-term basis, and security clearance of the individuals may or may not be available to the owner. A lot of trust is placed on a name, a reference, a passport, etc., and yet it is still a great concern to all of us, especially in this age of terrorism, increased crime, including petty theft, which is a growing concern in Canmore. This includes break-ins in vehicles and homes. These are primarily caused by short-term people. Who's going to monitor this aspect of short-term renters on our street? Do we have to wait for someone to be a victim? Our concern for our street is about safety, security, stability, and changes to our culture. The tourists come here to see the mountains, enjoy the outdoors, and hopefully see some animals. The residents come here to work, relax in a safe, quiet neighborhood, and bring up their families or retire in a beautiful town in the mountains. And we want it to stay that way. We are concerned that if any of us were to sell our homes, the commercial B&B would affect the marketability. We believe that fewer people would be interested in purchasing beside a short-term stay house and consequently devalue our property. Just a note that I would like to mention to the planners. I talked to an architect in Edmonton on the weekend, and he was saying the problem Edmonton is now having with the B&Bs is that the R2s and R1Ss, I don't know where they have an R1S, anywhere where there's a multiple, let's say R2s, people are changing them into B&Bs, and they're now having a short-term, or they're having a shortage of long-term rental places for people who want to stay and work in the city. As we mentioned earlier, none of us would have bought beside the B&B. Conclusion, due to the number of issues we have identified and the fact that there are many children of all ages in our neighborhood, we hope the town of Canmore would concentrate on allowing B&Bs closer to the center of town where all the other commercial properties are located, rather than pushing them into quiet residential neighborhoods. Thank you for the opportunity to express our concerns. We are all residents of Canmore and call this our home. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Woodruff. If you could just please stay there in case there's some questions. Just open up to my colleagues. Any questions? Councillor Sanford.
In this particular application, I'm not aware of a zoning change. Is that something that you had discussed with, because this area has a discretionary use, which is not necessarily, it's not a zoning change, it's a discretionary use. So you're referring to a zoning change? Is that?
No, it's a variance. We did not know there was a variance in the zoning law when we bought. It was never brought out to us. And I did look at the bylaws, and if it was there, I missed it. That's why I asked, when was it incorporated? Was it at the beginning when the subdivision was done, or later on?
I don't believe it's a variance, though, because it's a discretionary use. So the terminology is, I'm a little confused by that because
Okay.
I don't think anything's really changed. It's just a use that is at the discretion of the development officer if the conditions are met.
Okay, I
Okay.
agree that that's the way it is now, but we did not know that at the time. And if we had, we would have tried to find another place to live.
Okay, is that in the land, well, maybe you don't know that.
I don't know.
The land use
I'm like
bylaw.
you, the terminology is
Okay.
always R1, R1A, R1S, and then R2s.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Adam?
So is your concern that you believe the municipal bylaws changed to allow bed and breakfast in your neighborhood after the time you purchased the property? Or are you arguing that the permitting of this bed and breakfast amounts to a variance from what the land use bylaw is supposed to allow?
As I said earlier, we did not know that B&Bs were allowed in the area, and we think that that shouldn't be on our street for sure. It's a very closed-in area where crime has been very, very low. It is a one-way street, in and out, and we feel that people will come in and case the place out. There's been incidences of that if you go online. It just makes it that much more at risk for our neighbors, especially with children or seniors who are retired. They're scared of home invasions and things like that. We think it's going to change the culture. There's another area too that I have a little concern is that if everybody starts, every fourth house starts to become a B&B, we've changed completely our neighborhood family concept.
So just to clarify, Mr. Woodruff, you do recognize that the bylaw as it currently is, whenever it came into force, allows B&Bs as a discretionary use.
I don't know when that came in.
But I'm just saying you
But I know
recognize,
I know it
that's
now.
what is.
Yes,
that's
I know
what-
it now, and I know,
Okay.
yeah, and I would like to have known when it was passed. Was it in the originally when we bought it? Did we miss it, all of us? I don't know. That was a question I asked.
Yeah, in many respects, it's irrelevant to this particular hearing because we have to deal with the bylaw in front of us. We don't make bylaws and we don't change bylaws.
Okay.
Okay,
I agree. Yeah.
right. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Sanford?
I think the development officer mentioned that there were a number of other B&Bs in the neighborhood, not on your street, but on adjacent streets. Are you aware of any additional crime? Has there been a lot of crime in your district? Not on your street, because you don't have any B&Bs, but in that particular district, is crime an issue?
I don't know personally. I do know one of the neighbors was talking to an RCMP officer who's a friend of his, and he said crime has increased in this town, especially petty crimes like break-in and entries in cars and home invasions. The RCMP would have stats on that, or your bylaw officers would probably know. I don't know, but I know in our street I have not heard of any, and we want to keep it that way.
And so when a B&B application is approved, the B&B owner is required to be in the building when they're renting, I believe. So increased crime would affect the owner of the building because they're actually having to monitor their guests. So it's not like people are on their own. I mean, they're not.
Well, you're probably right, but the owner has to go get food if they're giving breakfast. They can't be in the house all the time, and people go out and, you know, I still say that they can still go for a walk and case out houses. You don't know who these people are and what from throughout North America and around the world.
But
And
there
that's
has
the
been no
only-
wevidence of increased crime in
Oh,
your.
we'll wait till it
in your-
happens then, okay? That's what you're telling me?
Oh, I'm
We
just
are
saying-
concerned. We
Is
are
there-
very concerned, and all 5 families are very concerned about the stability in our neighborhood and the change of the culture. Day-to-day people coming in and out. It's just like being downtown. We might as well go buy a condo downtown instead of the quiet neighborhood. And the people with their kids, there are 2 young kids under 5 years old right next door. They're worried. I've talked to them. Unfortunately, they're not here, but I've talked to them. I'm just saying, this is our concern.
And
Okay.
I think
Thank you.
we were hearing that.
Yeah.
Other questions? Mr. Birch?
Just one of the issues you raise is parking on the street, and you say it's going to be very hard for the applicant, if she has a bed and breakfast approved, monitor that. And I'm just wondering, what's your view of the parking on that street now? Is it a real problem, or is it a minor problem? And I understand you have various other concerns, but I'm just wondering about the parking issue.
The parking issue is manageable right now. It's, at some times it's very crowded, at some times it isn't. You look at the back of this photo that, that's where I left it there, you've seen it in front of you. There's one car parked in front of her, not her place, but right next to it. There are no other parking spots on that side of the road. There's a fire hydrant, and most of they're smaller lots. They all have double garages. So the parking on that side of the street is minimal. On our side of the street, we're R1S? I think we're R1S, which we're allowed a legal suite, but we have to live in the home. And parking on the street was allowed for in the design of the subdivision. So sometimes it's very quiet. Other times, especially right now, when the kids are coming home from university, our next door neighbor has 3 sons and 3 vehicles, and him and his wife have vehicles, and he also has an R1S, which is renters. Across the street, they have 2 sons and 4 vehicles, and it gets crowded sometimes, but overall, it's working well. More people coming and going, I question it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I've got some questions, and if anybody else has questions, just let me know. Mr. Woodruff, when you've talked throughout your presentation, and you've talked just now about more people coming through, right? So just so that we're all on the same page, with a bed and breakfast, we're talking about, in this bed and breakfast, my understanding it would be, 1 vehicle per day, and presumably it wouldn't be every day. So is that the volume that you're concerned about?
I'm not that concerned about the volume. She has the parking on her property. Concerned about keeping the people on the property, not parking out front is a concern, and she'll have to monitor it. That's not going to be easy for anybody. It's just the people coming and going. They might stay 3 days a week, and that's good too. But mostly they come a day and they go, or 2 days. The fear is that they'll scout out the area and find who's not living there, who's away for periods of time. Some people go away for a month or 2. Others are traveling all the time. The 2 people across the street, they're both veterinarians, and one works out of most of the central Alberta, so he's away quite a bit, and his wife travels quite a bit. She works for a pharmaceutical company. And they're concerned about leaving their place vacant. Right now, all the neighbors are good. We watch each other just like every other neighborhood in Canada. But you got people coming and going, and we don't know who they are.
So I want to ask you a question: is why does that relate to a B&B as opposed to? I mean, that could happen without B&Bs on the street.
Our place has a basement suite. We've had the renters there for going on 7 years. They work in the town here. They're very quiet. They mind their P's and Q's. They're 2 working guys, and we know them. We did a security check on them. We did a criminal check on them. We did a financial check on them because I go through a property management company. I don't want to take the chance of somebody downstairs who I don't know at least has a good record. It's consistent. And that's the same in some of the other ones. They're long-term. Long-term, you've got to go through those criteria. Day-to-day, I don't think they do it. And you read the stories on Airbnbs and that, and they don't check.
Well, Airbnbs is very different than a B&B.
She can register as an Airbnb. Yeah. There's nothing in the bylaws that'll stop her.
Is this a tourist home district? No, she can't register as an Airbnb.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I got it wrong then. But how's she going to do all her security checks on the people?
Yeah. My question was actually, what's preventing from somebody coming and scouting your houses right now, even if there isn't a B&B, or even if there is not a B&B operational?
I'm sure they do. Cars go up and down looking for properties for sale or for other reasons. They maybe get lost, get up there. I would suspect, I don't know, you'd have to ask the RCMP, but they probably don't go into a dead-end street. And you can't run uphill into Silvertip to run away with anything they steal, like jewelry and stuff. It's a long way. It's a very secure little pocket that all of us bought into quite some time ago. 18 years ago, I bought in there.
I guess I'm just continuing on with previous questions. I'm having trouble seeing the concern to the extent being expressed relating to a single B or single B&B. So that's what I'm asking for is, like, do you have something that's directly related to a B&B or some evidence that would justify the level of concern being expressed?
Okay, you're going to wait till the victim, one of us is a victim, and then you're going to be able to say, okay, that happens. I'm sorry, I can't give you that statistics. Maybe you can get it through the RCMP and ask them what they feel about B&Bs, especially in secluded areas.
Yeah. Once again, ours is to decide.
ours
Is to decide here whether a bylaw has been properly implemented, and whether that there's anything wrong with the decision that was made, and to determine if there's any planning reason why we would move from that. And so, just looking to. That's what those questions were, was just to find out if you had any other evidence that you wanted to provide in that regard.
Well, as I said earlier, that's a social thing. And I think the planning department is very aware of social aspects of neighborhoods and when they design and how they design. And that's the way it was designed back in 2000, when they started the subdivision.
So just to separate, and it's a little bit out of the norm, but just so that we're operating in the same context, whenever a bylaw comes into existence, it goes through a process that includes a public process. And so this is, the sorts of things that come out during public processes then get weighed by the decision maker who creates a bylaw. So whenever you bought, it was either after that had already happened and it was already there and you missed it, or it happened beforehand and you would have had an opportunity to apply when the bylaw was being changed, because there would have been notices posted and in the paper, etc. So what we're here today, though, is we can't rewrite a bylaw, we can't change a bylaw. So and evidence is to be brought to us. This isn't an investigative board where we're going to go talk to the RCMP or otherwise. We're a quasi-judicial board that's receiving all the information. Then we will apply it against the bylaw and decide from there. So I was just exploring that. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Thank you, Mr. Woodruff, for your presentation.
You do have the power to not grant the permit.
We have the power of the Development Authority. What we are allowed to do is accept the request with conditions, or deny the request with reasons. The reasons have to be planning reasons.
Okay? Then the planning department's better get out of the social aspect.
I would now ask, beyond that which was already provided as part of our package, are there any other correspondence that's been received in favor of the appeal? No? Okay. I would now ask those speaking in opposition to the appeal to come forward. So, Ms. Schneider.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to say first I agree with the comments of Mr. Welsh. I believe he appropriately utilized his discretion in his approval, as my intended use for the property meets the development standards set out in the land use bylaw. I have provided my written submissions, and I don't have a whole lot to add to that, other than offering my gratitude and many thanks for your time and attention and consideration to the matter, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Schneider. Open to my colleagues. Any questions? Councillor Sanford?
Originally, you had applied for 3 rooms, is that correct?
Yes.
In your home. And the development officer suggested that you needed to have the requisite amount of parking,
Correct.
and you didn't have enough parking for 3 rooms. Is that correct?
Correct. It was my misunderstanding. I read it to be 8 by 20 per car. So I measured the space in the driveway, which actually would accommodate 3 vehicles. I think it was my misunderstanding of those calculations.
Okay, so you actually have more rooms than the 1 room that that the development officer had given you authority to rent.
Pardon
correct?
me?
You had more rooms, but the compromise was 1 room because that's what was, that's how much parking you had to support that 1 room?
That is correct, yes.
And the intention of that parking spot is for the use of the B&B guest, is that correct?
That is the intention, yes.
Yeah. So even if you have more cars in your own possession, your B&B guest would be using that particular parking spot.
That is correct. I have a 2-car garage and then the driveway that you could see in the photograph. So I have 1 vehicle, 1 personal vehicle. So it would be my vehicle in the garage, not in tandem with the 1 guest parking.
Do you normally park on the street now?
I always park inside my garage.
Okay. So you're not overburdening the neighborhood with extra cars because you meet the requirement for the off-street parking?
Not at all. In fact, my grown children who have now moved out have significantly decreased the amount of parking and traffic on the street.
Okay. Thank you.
Just following up on that, you've read the notice of decision and the conditions?
Yes,
that
I
were-
have.
Yeah, so, and the requirement to have the 1 parking stall for the visitor on site, you recognize that if that's not followed, there'll be an investigation and possibly the license could be pulled?
It's my understanding if I violate any of the requirements, I would have the license revoked or the permit revoked.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Birch?
Yeah, excuse me, I have 2. One, well, I don't think it's pertinent to the decision we're making. It comes up both in the decision of the development officer, his last condition of approval, and it's come up a couple times. What's the attractant in the yard that is there for bears?
The attractant is
Yeah.
a crabapple tree.
Okay.
So what I've gotten in the practice of doing is I will by August go in and clip all the fruit from the tree. So that, as far as I know, last year was not a problem. with him coming
Thank
to
you.
the-
I'm curious. It's
Yeah.
not affecting my decision.
I'm
I
also
don't- I
looking
think
to
it-
replace that
Yeah.
tree altogether,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm managing it at this point to keep the fruit off.
I don't think it has bearing. There are crabapple trees on properties without B&Bs. It's a different issue. But I was just curious. More importantly, the appellant has raised some issues with regards to crime and safety to the neighborhood, and not to have an argument, that might be considered a planning-related reason. What would you say in response to his concerns about potential for crime, strangers in the neighborhood, and those types of things?
Well, I would obviously have those same concerns for myself. My intention at this point is I have a friend who has a really well-established B&B in town who has a significant amount of overflow. And she receives her customers through an agency out of Europe. They're mostly European travelers. And they're screened, they're traveling on passports, and they're, in her experience in running her organization, she's had no trouble with any type of safety or crime or noise issues. So I would be looking to accommodate her overflow primarily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Sanford?
You are aware that there is a B&B association in Canmore?
I am aware, yes.
And have you joined the B&B association? Or
I have not.
Okay.
I intend to, but I'm waiting
Right.
to ensure that I'm properly approved.
So you're aware that there is an umbrella group in the community and that you can join once you get your B&B license?
Yes, I'm
If
aware.
that happens. So I guess they have a lot of information and support services that they provide to members. But I just want to make sure that you're aware that there is an association.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I now ask the clerk, beyond Ms. Schneider's materials that were provided in the agenda package, is there any additional correspondence in opposition? I don't see anyone who's going to speak neither in favor nor opposition, so I'll skip that. And has there been any other correspondence received whatsoever? No? Okay, great. Thank you. All right, then I'd like to ask administration, do you have any closing remarks, comments, and hopefully maybe that number for the percentage that Mr. Birch asked about?
Thank you. Alaric and I have been working to satisfy a few of these answers for you. Regarding B&Bs being allowed in R1 districts, we double-checked, and they were allowed in the 86 bylaw and in the 99.
86 and 99?
Yeah, so apparently they were allowed when the appellant purchased his home. Census district, this particular census district has 3 registered B&Bs for 189 single-family homes, so that's less than 2%. So we're good on that point.
Okay.
Can't really speak to the social aspects, but I do know that the R1A district across Cougar Creek has 5 B&Bs that are approved and active, and we've not heard any anecdotal stories or evidence about upticks in crime or things from that neighborhood. Regarding the wildlife attractant, it is noted, as I think someone called out, item 19 on Schedule A is the applicant needing to remove that. And then lastly, just as a correction, I think I did speak that Airbnb is a website and anyone can use that as a platform to advertise. So the applicant can use that to advertise, but this is not an approval of a tourist home. It's approval of a B&B. So hotels use Airbnb, all sorts of visitor accommodations do. So just wanted to make that point.
Okay, so just to clarify on that, they can advertise on that, but they can't operate as an Airbnb where the owner is not present.
Correct. Alaric might be better to speak to this.
So the first instance that I ever heard of Airbnb was a situation where someone was renting the couch in their apartment unit.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is there's a whole new range of accommodation options out there. So, and increasingly with the success of the vacation rental platforms, as Mr. Welsh alluded to, we're seeing regular hotels now advertising on these platforms because they know the consumer is going to these sources. So what we require is that they meet the requirements of the land use bylaw that says the bed and breakfast shall not provide cooking facilities for guests associated with the B&B. The access is only through the principal dwelling, not only through a separate private entrance. They have to be the resident of the building. So those conditions, whether or not they advertise on VRBO, HomeAway.com, Airbnb, et cetera, that's up to them.
But just to be clear, in order for somebody to stay at the Airbnb, regardless of how it's advertised, it has to be approved as a B&B, and it has to be operated like a B&B, not like you can't have the owner absent and just having somebody else stay in their home.
Yes, the requirement is that the bed and breakfast property, bed and breakfast in the land use bylaw sense of the term, be the owner be the resident.
And those hotel rooms, they're obviously within a visitor accommodation zone.
Yes.
So that's not a problem. The person renting out their couch on Airbnb, they probably got a problem unless they're in a tourist home district.
It starts to get into a bit of a gray area because they are a little bit more of a guest. Anyway, we have not been focusing our enforcement activities on those properties.
Right.
At this point, that could change tomorrow or next week. Right. But so far, the tourist home issues that we're seeing is when people are largely renting their property out with no oversight directly at that time.
Exactly. That is clearly not allowed.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Anything else from administration?
No.
Any other questions or clarification? No? Mr. Woodruff, would you like to say anything further in closing or for clarification?
Not really. I think I covered everything that I can do. It's going to make it tough in our neighborhood, on our street in particular, where the surrounding neighbors are very, very concerned.
And you have admirably represented their interest and brought forward the concerns. So, any other questions of the board anywhere? No? Okay. And Ms. Schneider, is there anything else that you'd like to add? If you can come up to the...
Sorry.
Yeah.
In my research, I did find that the type of traveler that enjoys staying in a B&B is typically in their reproductive years, they're family-oriented, they're usually educated, and they're looking for a more authentic experience within the town, and that they're usually not the type of people looking to scam or create any type of crime.
I saw that in the materials you provided.
It's in my written materials as well. I just thought I might add that because in case anyone didn't have the opportunity to see that.
Okay.
A few studies out there sort of confirm that that type of traveler is fairly safe.
Thank you. Any questions? Mr. Birch?
Yeah, just one that just came up. The bylaw stipulates that you cannot have people coming to your B&B and using a separate entrance. They have to come to the main front door. I'm speaking generically. But is that the way you would function as well?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, they'd come to the front door, someone would greet them, then they go to their unit.
That is correct. Yes, they come through the front door.
Thank you.
The other thing I would like to note is that the land use bylaw has, to my understanding, been in effect since the outset of the development of the subdivision and even prior to. That is my understanding, if that is helpful to you at all.
Yeah, we've been provided dates by the administration. Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're just right at the end here. Mr. Woodruff, do you feel that you've had a fair hearing?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Schneider, do you have any concerns with the hearing?
No, I experienced
Great. Great, thank you. Well, this hearing is now concluded. In accordance with provincial legislation, the board is required to hand down its decision with 15 days from today's date. No decision is binding until the board issues a written decision. And like I said, we try to not have you wait 15 days. We'll hopefully be sooner than that. Mr. Woodruff?
Mr. Chairman, about the $250 that I have to pay
Right.
to appeal, I did send a letter in asking that I get that back.
Right, and that was noted, and it will be dealt with during the business hearing of the board. Great. All right, that being the case, I'm going to make a motion for adjournment of today's hearing. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll take a break and then we'll get into a business meeting. I call this business meeting of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board to order. Everybody knows my name and all of us, and there's nobody else to talk to except for those elsewhere in the building who are watching this right now. Adoption of the agenda. I would like to add an item, and I'd like to add 5B, and it is materials provided to potential appellants. There'll be a discussion. Any other additions, deletions, or changes? Seeing none, I move adoption of the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Adoption of minutes. We have 2 sets of minutes to adopt. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the April 17th appeal hearing minutes? Mr. Birch?
I think other people might. There are a few errors. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So I'll just let Jolene. Got it? So with the very start, council members present. It shouldn't say council, just probably members present. This is the 6th line down or so, right above the list of members present.
It should say either just members present or board members present, but not council.
Yeah, so you could just delete council and it'll work. On the next page, under questions of the development officer by the board. Got it? First line, the board asked for clarity, probably. That's minor.
Okay.
And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
For that one.
Any other corrections? Yep.
Just a small correction on the first page. Lindsay Allman's name is spelled in 2 different ways. I'm not sure which is correct.
Okay. Thank you to both of you for those. Anything else? All right. I will move adoption then of the April 17th, 2019 appeal hearing meeting minutes of, wait a minute. Oh yeah, DP is correct. DP 2019-050 as corrected. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now turning to the business meeting minutes. Same issue on the council members present. Was there anything beyond that?
No, just that one.
Okay, so you'll make that correction as well? Thank you. All right, so now I will move adoption of the April 17th, 2019 business meeting minutes as corrected. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And now we'll move on to the next scheduled business meeting is still unknown. So we'll move on to other business. Refund of application fee to DP 2019-017. And I make a motion that we move in camera for discussion. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, so camera off, please. Yeah, the potential, yeah, the person who's coming in and saying, I'm considering appealing, or I'd like to appeal, what do they get?
When they make the appeal, I do connect with the file manager, and then they depend, like, for instance, in this situation, then he contacted the applicant, which was Paige, to say that the development permit was held up until the decision of the SDAB. For myself, I don't make any more contact other than to finalize the hearing date, the time. Then I let them know the deadline that they can provide me with any material so that I can include it with the staff report going out.
So when they come to you, have they already filled in their appeal?
And give me the reasons, yeah.
So they're already decided that they're appealing by the time they talk to you?
Yeah, and so when those development permits are applied for, they have to put a 10-day notice that is prior to the decision of the development officer, saying that this property has a development permit application in place, and it lists the reasons, and that goes up for 10 days, and that's simply an opportunity for people to come in and say, hey, I saw this on my neighbor, these are my concerns. Development permits are public, so they can come in and we can...
So does the town have any resources, whoever they come and talk to at the front desk or development officer or yourself, does the town have any resources to say, this is what the hearing's all about, this is what you can appeal or can't appeal, or?
Not readily available, no. I have come out and spoken to people, and I've also had the file managers speak to it. That was why I added those. I substantially changed the application form to include those. It was a bit of a thought in this particular case that perhaps there should have been more conversation.
Yeah, because it just,
Yeah.
so I think he might have decided not to appeal had they had a conversation about process and what can actually be done here and that sort of thing.
There is some information on the website
Yes,
that could
yes,
be
you're right.
either, I think it could be improved to include more references to the purpose of an appeal and what this board can and cannot hear, with some examples perhaps, because it's quite like, what does a planning matter actually mean?
Yeah.
And then at
I
minimum,
agree.
you could direct them to the website.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I am often
That
working
is
with
the only thing I've seen.
communications, Yeah, and in our manual, that we've all got and that's available online, there are a couple pages on what is considered
Right.
appealable or not. It's kind of in the green section of it.
Yeah, the Municipal Government Board, when they
That's
came for
right.
the training, they had a whole bunch of different handouts too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, perhaps on our end, it would be good to have more conversation with the appellants upon submission.
Do you have
Didn't want you
the
to melt.
capacity to work with this, this training material and tweak it to assist the appellants?
What's that, sorry?
Do you have the ability to take some of this material and tweak it to provide some more guidance to the appellants? Is that something that the town staff
Yeah,
is willing to do?
that the website is a good place, because I tend to direct people to the website, and
That's probably where they
if
look
people
first.
are having invested time in this, I think that's part of their due diligence, is becoming informed on it. I think perhaps I could bring it back to the department and just let the file managers know that it's worth having a conversation with the appellant, because I think if they file an appeal and then within 24 hours before I've arranged with you guys that they're like, you know what, I don't want to do that, we would be happy to do a refund. And
But I think it would be useful to have materials available online that are more clear and more
I
thorough.
agree. Yeah, and I
Because
can work
relying
on
on a
that.
conversation isn't always going to happen depending on how the appellant comes to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and I agree, and I'm happy
Without
to
too
work
much
on that.
additional work, I think.
I think it'd be okay.
the
I
new
think that I
lens.
can start with the form that I put out. But yeah, I'd be happy to add it to the website.
What kind of materials do the appellants have access to with regards to the actual decision that they're appealing?
They can, so because it's a development permit and it's public, they, just like what was in the staff report, they have access to the reasons of the refusal or approval of the development permit. So the notice of decision, essentially, that lists the conditions and Yeah, and so the DP does become public, so they can see the plans that are submitted, the reasons and the decisions and the conditions that are set out by the planner. So, but we don't have it online, they need to come in, but we do advertise that. And we also put it in the paper, the 21 days, so after in this case, the development permit is approved, then it goes into the newspaper saying that it's approved, and they have the 21 days to appeal, which is what happened in this situation, along with the posted notice. Yeah, so I can definitely put some more information on the website.
Yeah, any other comments that anybody would like to make on this topic?
I think, go ahead, Greg. Well, I was thinking, to me, this really speaks to how to improve the quality of submissions, and, well, it speaks to appellant screening as well.
Yeah.
But if people do choose to appeal, how do we get the best information, the most relevant information, and really focus the issues as framed by the parties?
Well, and yeah, it will free up resources in the long run. Because I recall that we've had some submissions that or had some appeals that a conversation might have pointed out to them. I know that there was one is that we had no
Yes.
possibility to do anything. I mean, what was being asked, we could not provide.
Yeah, I understand.
And that could have
what
been
you're
cleared up in advance, right? Okay. Greg?
Just my sense is that probably the best person to speak to someone who has an inquiry is the, I guess, so-called file manager or case manager or
Yeah.
whatever. They'll have thought about it, they'll understand why they're making the decision. And if I was in your shoes, I'd probably say, hey, I'll see if Joshua, in this case, could talk with you and explain what's going on, and a lot can be worked out that way.
And of course,
I agree.
providing information, I mean, we can't put on the development officer to provide advice, what would you do, but to provide the information is that the SDAB does not have the ability to actually grant that. That's information. You decide whether you still want to make the appeal, right?
Yeah.
That sort of thing, okay. Okay, so,
I'm happy to follow up with you guys on a separate meeting or an email.
yeah, just so it's noted in the minutes, I'd like to just make a motion then that the SDAB clerk look at our website materials, municipal government board materials, and what other SDABs are doing to come up with some recommendations of how we can improve information for potential appellants. Let me know when you've got that.
Yes.
Okay? All right. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. All right, thank you. That brings us to adjournment of the business meeting. So I move adjournment of this meeting at 4:10. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Okay, so we'll wait for